Welcome to the Leadership Lovers Podcast. I'm your host, Will Gladhart, CMO at the Culture Think Tank. At the Culture Think Tank, we empower leaders with metrics that strengthen culture, drive performance, and return. We're here today to learn about the actions leaders have taken to address organizational change. Our guest today is Chris Teahan, a financial advisor at Merrill Wealth Management. Thanks for taking the time to join us.
Hey, thank you for having me on. It's an honor to be considered a CEO, but I won't really talk too much about that, more about the leadership side and everything else. But thank you so much for having me on.
Perfect. Well, let's begin by having you share with our audience a bit about yourself, your background, and not only your organization, but then I think there's some other things we're going to talk about in terms of like sports teams, building winning culture. We'll let you kick off and lean into that.
So obviously, I'm Chris Teahan, third-year financial advisor over at Merrill Lynch. Early on in my career, trying to navigate networking, client acquisition, all the fun things in life, especially as a young gentleman. But I do have a little bit of an interesting background. Played sports throughout my whole life at a very, very high level. Played at Rockhurst High School, football and basketball, got some recognition there, but then ended up going over to the University of Kansas and playing basketball there for 5 years and was on some very high level teams. My last year there, we ended up winning a national championship. So, there's some things that I've learned along the way that I continue to bring into my personal life and my business life about culture, the way that you attack each day with a certain mindset, and just kind of, the ebbs and flows of how life kicks you and pushes you back up and then kicks you down again. So there's some insights that I've learned and I'm very happy to share with everybody. I've been very transparent since my time at Kansas been over about things that have really helped me kind of tick going forward.
Absolutely. So we'll be discussing 3 questions today as a warm up to start our conversation. Tell me why you believe a healthy culture is critical.
So, a healthy culture is basically the building blocks of a team, of a program, of a work, a business, whatever it may be. The culture, that is where you live your life. You live your life not in the actions or the results that come up, but the culture is the foundation of a house. No matter what you want to build on top of it, if you have cracks in your foundation, it's going to collapse at some point, or there's going to be areas where you have to go back and address that, looking back in the rear view, when in reality, you should be looking either in the present or into the future. So the culture is something that I've really have tried to change in my life. I think that people think of a culture as a conglomerate, a group of people, but I think there's also culture in each and every one of us. The way that you wake up in the morning, the attitude, the effort that you put towards working, whether it is, hey, taking my daughter to a basketball game or taking your dogs on a walk, there's a culture that goes into the way that you address that, the way that you are intentionally doing that and what you're trying to get out of many things. So culture is something that I think I'm very fairly well versed in it, but there's definitely the building blocks of life, and that is able to propel you to do the things that you want to do.
Excellent. So it's been our experience that leaders tend to struggle in 3 key areas: people, process, or profits. In your role as a fellow leader, could you maybe identify which of these areas represented the greatest cultural challenge or challenges in your team environment?
I would say the people is a big one, but I would say the process is the one that you focused on the most. Once you have that process correct, that is where you can kind of propel yourself going forward. So at Kansas, we had a thing called the pyramid of success. John Wooden had his version of it. The University of Kansas had their version of it. First couple of years when I was there, we had a struggle. There was big personalities on the team, just like you have in any big time business or family or whatever it may be. And so what we had the pyramid of success, which was basically the bottom half of it was where you lived your life. And that was acting right, speaking right, and thinking right. And then the top of the pyramid was actions and results. When a lot of people look at the result of an action, they think about what went wrong during the action. They didn't think about what happened on the bottom half of that period or of that pyramid. So you're looking at, was I communicating with my team correctly? Was my thoughts and intentions in the right place? And was I actively not being selfish in any way, but making sure that all of that was working together to create the action? And once you get to the action, you've already done all the work. So I think that there's issues with obviously process and people. I think those both go hand to hand. I think they're both kind of one conglomerate. When I was at the University of Kansas, we had the pyramid of success, which basically was, there was 2 sides of the pyramid. There was the base and then there was the top. The top of it was the action and the result. And a lot of people live up in the top where they think that the action caused the result and that was the issue. So they'll go back and think about, okay, what play could I have changed in the game? what sentence could I have changed in the sales pitch? But they never think about what led up to what was happening. And at the University of Kansas, we had three things that we did, which was speaking right, acting right, and thinking right. Were you communicating well? Were you communicating in a clear, concise way? Were you getting too far ahead of yourself? Were you asking too much? Were you thinking the correct way? Were you thinking, hey, here's the task ahead. Here's what I need to do to get my team there. Or were you thinking about, I can't wait for this to be over? And then acting right was just the way that you treat people. There's going to be people in business that you're not going to get along with. You're going to have a team of 10 to 15 people. As much as I would like to say that I get along with every single person and every single person I've met likes me, it's not going to happen. So it's acting right, knowing that, hey, we're working towards a common goal. Between these walls, between the 8 hours you're at work, between the 3 hours that you're at practice, are you treating these people as somebody who's on the same exact level as you, has the same exact set of values? Because in reality, when you're working towards a common goal, that should be certain things that are there. So we would always live our lives in the bottom half of that pyramid. When we would lose a game or have a bad season, whatever it may be, we were never looking towards what happened in the game. We were looking back to what happened in that scouting report. Was the scout team coherently working together and working together on the same page? Was everyone putting their best effort forward? So I'll wrap this into the people part of it. Coach Self used to tell this great story all the time about what one bad person can do to culture. He says, you're coming home from work, you get your favorite pint of ice cream. You get a gallon of ice cream, whatever your best favorite flavor is. I'm a chocolate ice cream guy. And you open up that pint of ice cream, and there's just a tiny little piece of turd in the top right. Tiny little piece. You have a gallon of ice cream. So, there's a ton of space that's not being touched by this one singular turd that's in there. What do you do with the ice cream? The answer is you throw it away. So why, out of a business of 100 people, if you have one or two bad eggs, that can completely destroy the result, or one or two bad actions, or one or two bad communication areas. That can completely destroy the result of the action. So, that's something that I've always thought of going forward is making sure that everything's on the bottom half of that period. Am I speaking right? Because in the end of it, you can't control the result in business. You can't control the fact that a small company is trying to land a big company's business and they don't have the wherewithal. But, the fact that you're in that third or fourth stage of the negotiation, sales, whatever it may be, that's all that matters.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I love that you speak about the ice cream example because it's very apropos in terms of, we have heard from other leaders that there was a top performer, but that top performer was toxic to the whole organization. And how did they go about exiting that individual? Or they had a specific process that the company had done for years, but it wasn't working. But when everyone understood what the mission was, or they were all on the same page, they were moving as a team and people were being communicated with, things moved forward and everyone got on board really quickly. So it was that reflective that you talked about, but also the ability to be able to be moving forward and looking at other elements. Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing that and identifying that. Was there any specific challenge as you were playing on a team or that kind of negatively impacted performance or something within the organization itself?
I would say that the people part of it was probably the biggest challenge to overcome. I think that everybody in business can say that unless you're scientific or some area where you just can't figure out a certain equation. When you're looking at a regular business, it's usually the people that hurt you. And it's by not having a great leader. And it's also by not having the core values and a common goal to work towards and everybody knowing their role. There was many times when I was at Kansas that seasons would be ruined very early into the season because 3 or 4 guys who were key contributors, doesn't matter if they were averaging 20 points or they were on the scout team or they were needed to play 5 minutes a game, were not playing their role. So those were things that it took a while for even Coach Self to figure out. And that's kind of why we implemented the pyramid, was to make sure that, hey, everybody was on the same page. Specific examples, I can't really think of one or can't really say, some of the specific examples that I have, but I always would say, be a star in your role. That's the most important thing. You have role players in your business, on your team. And in reality, those are some of the most important people. Having somebody who has a role that doesn't get the recognition it deserves, having someone in HR, having someone who's putting together the marketing tools, not the salesperson, not the person who's the front of the business, not the guy who's averaging 30 points a game, but the people in their roles. And having someone who takes their role as an honor and gives himself 100% to that role, knowing that when they make the ultimate goal, when they meet it, when they get there. The pie is big enough for absolutely everybody. My role at Kansas was not to play and score that 10,000 points when I was there. My goal was to get the scout team ready, was to watch a ton of film, make sure everybody knew exactly what they were doing, and then also be a leader in an aspect that no one else would see. In the 10,000 hours, 100,000 hours that I was at Kansas, no one ever saw 95% to really probably 99% of what I had done. But, I felt that role was something that was valuable to my team and everything going forward.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to share. And we sometimes see this in mergers and acquisitions and also private equity venture capital, that sometimes there are challenges around the right people, the right fit. High growth or a quick change often causes shifts, but being intentional about people and living the values of the organization or setting those out clearly. One thing about Coach Self is he is a master at doing some of those elements, and it's why you guys keep going, or at the time kept going to championships and continue moving forward. But it's creating that winning culture, that winning team. Chris, anything else you'd like to add or share with fellow leaders?
I want to be as much as help as I can. When I sit back and think of certain things that I've learned over the course of my time, coming from a 25-year-old, this may not hold a ton of value, but there's certain things that I think that I've taken from what I've done. And there's one thing that I would say that everybody needs to do, or everyone needs to at least think about if they do it. And it is, where do you live your life? Do you live your life on the top of mountain peaks, or do you live your life at the bottom of a canyon? Both of those answers are not the best answers. You don't want to be always so high. You're going to get to a certain point where you're going to be looking over the mountains being like, I conquered it. And you're going to be 45 with, however many kids and whatever it may be. And, you're going to think, okay, like this is the peak of what's happened. Or when you're really down on yourself, are you in the bottom of that canyon where, hey, I don't know if I can do this anymore. I'm going to give up. I'm going to quit my job. I'm going to stop doing the startup that I've dreamed of doing for so long. Or do you live your life in the hills and the valleys? And the hills and the valleys flow like this. When you have a great success, it is great. Hey, take a second, congratulate yourself, take an hour, take a night, take a couple days to sit there and really reflect on what it was that got you there, but never be, hey, this is the almighty moment. And then also on the downside, you never want to get too low. I have a job where right now I'm a 25-year-old male who goes up to people who are 65, 50, 45, who are very high income net worth individuals who've worked their whole life to attain this. And my job is to get their money and bring it over to me and have me manage it. So what do you think most people's reactions are? It's no. And it's constant no's, and it's constantly getting kicked down and whatever it may be. And I think of that as a learning experience from my point of view, getting the kick down, getting the knockdown, knowing that I can pick myself back up, but also knowing that, hey, I got that meeting. I sat there. I took something away from it. I don't think there's ever been a meeting that you've had, that I've had, or that anybody's really had where you can walk away being like, I learned absolutely nothing. Even if it's, hey, I'll never get in a meeting with somebody like this again. You've learned a little bit of something.
Yeah,
those are some things that
No, I really like that. I think that's sage advice, thinking about living in the in-between versus the super high and the super low, because I'm sure there were those experiences on the basketball team, but as you noted, also within your job role and changing markets, changing environment, etc. Thank you again for sharing your thoughts, Chris. I've enjoyed having you on our Leadership Lovers podcast. Really appreciate your insights.
All right, appreciate it. Well, thank you for having me on.
Thank you for joining us on the Leadership Lovers podcast. Find all our Leadership Lovers episodes on the Culture Think Tank website at www.theculturethinktank.com or listen on your favorite streaming platform. We'd love to hear from you about the challenges you have faced as a leader. Tune in weekly as we invite leaders to share their experiences in strengthening culture and performance, one action at a time.